The voicemail came in at 6:14 p.m., and I listened to it twice before I understood that my own mother had hung up on a paramedic. I was strapped to a backboard in the back of an ambulance on I-70, my left arm bent in a direction. Arms don't bend, glass still in my hair, and the EMT, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, was holding my phone up to my good ear because I'd begged him to. He dialed the first number under my emergency contacts. My mother. He'd told her, calmly, professionally, that her daughter had been in a serious collision and was being transported to St. Luke's, and could she please come to the hospital? And I heard her ask, in that flat voice I'd spent 31 years trying to decode, "Is she conscious?" "Yes, ma'am, she's alert." "Is she dying?" "No, ma'am, but she's badly injured and she's asking for." "Then it can wait." Penny just got slapped with a $400 ticket for blowing through a school zone, and she is absolutely beside herself. "I cannot deal with two crises tonight." And then the line went dead. The EMT, bless him, didn't say anything. He just lowered the phone and looked at me with this careful, neutral expression that I recognized because I'd worn it myself 100 times at work. The face you make when you've decided not to react to something so the other person doesn't have to feel it on top of everything else. He set the phone on my chest and went back to checking my vitals. And I lay there, watching the lights of the highway smear past the little window, and I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to start screaming, and screaming hurts when you have 3 broken ribs. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter for the story, but I'll tell you the parts that do. I was 31 that fall. I had spent the previous 9 years building a commercial interior design firm from a card table in a studio apartment into a 12-person studio with 2 floors of a converted warehouse downtown and a client list that included a hospital wing, a boutique hotel chain, and the kind of restaurants that get written up in magazines my mother pretended she'd never read. I'd done it alone, no loans from family, no connections handed down. I'd done it while also, and I want to be very precise about this, paying my parents' mortgage for 6 years. 6 years. $2,400 a month, wired on the first, every month. Since the day my father got downsized out of a job he'd held for 22 years and decided that retirement at 56 was something he was owed, plus the property taxes once a year, plus the time the roof needed replacing, plus my sister's emergencies, which arrived with the regularity of a subscription. Penny's car repairs. Penny's security deposits. Penny's security deposits. Penny's just until I get back on my feet wounds that nobody ever expected back, least of all Penny. I'm not telling you this, so you'll think I'm a saint. I'm telling you so you'll understand the math of it, because the math is the whole point. By a conservative count, I had given my parents and my younger sister somewhere north of $200,000 over 6 years. And on the night a tractor trailer ran a red light and folded my car around a street light, the most my mother could spare was a $400 ticket's worth of sympathy for the wrong daughter. The thing about being the reliable one is that everybody stops being able to see you. You become furniture. You become a utility, like the water heater, noticed only when you fail to produce. I had been producing for so long that the idea of me needing something had become literally unthinkable to my family. There was no slot in their understanding of the world for the strong one is on a backboard. My husband was in Seattle that week. I should have led with that, maybe, because his absence is the reason any of the rest of it could happen. He'd flown out Monday for a contractors conference and wasn't due back until Thursday. His name was Reese, and I want you to hold on to him because he matters later in a way I didn't see coming. When the accident happened, it was Wednesday night. His phone was off in some convention center ballroom, and the only people whose numbers were stored under in case of emergency and a phone I'd set up years ago and never updated were my mother and my father. So nobody came. Let me say that again because it took me a long time to be able to say it without my voice doing something I didn't authorize. I was in a hospital for 11 hours before a single member of my family walked through the door, and the only reason one of them eventually did was money. The first few hours are a blur of fluorescent ceiling tiles, and people asking me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10, while doing things that made the number meaningless. They set my arm. They taped my ribs. They ran me through a CT machine twice because the first images worried somebody, and then a doctor with kind eyes and tired shoulders sat down next to my bed around 11 o'clock and told me I'd been extraordinarily lucky. A few inches different, and we'd be having a very different conversation, she said. Or not having one at all. I asked her if anyone had called for me. She checked. No one had. I'd left messages. Of course I'd left messages. Sometime around hour 2, when a nurse helped me text from my good hand, I'd written to my father, "Dad, I'm in the hospital. Car accident, St. Luke's. Please come. I'm scared." I watched the little red notification appear under it at 8:47 p.m., and then nothing happened for the rest of the night. He read it. He read that his daughter was scared and in a hospital, and he read it and he put his phone back in his pocket and he went on with his evening. I learned later what the evening involved. I learned it because my sister, in one of the great unforced errors of all time, posted about it. While I was getting my ribs taped, my parents and Penny were at a restaurant. A nice one, the kind I'd taken them to on birthdays, because my mother had decided that what Penny needed after the trauma of her traffic ticket was a comforting dinner out. Penny posted a photo, 3 glasses of wine on a white tablecloth, the caption, something about how family shows up for each other when times are hard. I saw it the next morning. I have looked at that photo more times than is healthy. The timestamp was 9,002 p.m., 15 minutes after my father read my message. Here is the part where I tell you about the call that finally brought my father to the hospital. And I need you to understand the timeline exactly, because the timeline is where the cruelty stops being passive and becomes something with a shape. 8:47 p.m. My father reads my text. Does nothing. 9:02 p.m. The wine photo. 11:30 p.m. I fall asleep, finally from exhaustion and whatever they'd put in the IV. 7,050 a.m. I wake up. Still alone. A different nurse. A shift change. A new face asking if there's anyone she can call for me. I say no. I had decided, sometime in the night, that I would not beg again. 9:15 a.m. My phone rings. It's my mother. I want to be honest about the hope. For one stupid animal second, I thought she was calling because she'd come to her senses. I thought maybe Penny's crisis had resolved, and now there was room in her head for me. I answered with my heart in my throat. Finally, she said, "I've been trying to reach you all night. Where have you been?" I had 11 missed calls on my phone. 0 of them were from her. She wasn't calling to ask how I was. She was calling because the mortgage payment hadn't gone through. The first of the month had been 2 days earlier, and in the chaos of, nearly dying, I hadn't logged into my bank to manually approve the transfer that I'd stupidly never set to automatic, because some part of me, even then, wanted the monthly proof that I was choosing to do this, that they couldn't take it for granted. The bank declined it, she said. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Your father had to talk to the property manager. We looked like deadbeats. What is going on with you? And I said I remembered the exact flatness of my own voice, like I was reading a weather report. I was in a car accident, Mom. I've been in the hospital since last night. The paramedics called you. Silence. Then, well, that doesn't explain the mortgage. That's not a paraphrase. That is what she said. I have replayed it enough times to be sure. That doesn't explain the mortgage. It was at that exact moment, lying in a bed with my arm in a cast and my chest wrapped like a mummy, that something in me that had been straining for 31 years finally, quietly, snapped. Not with a bang, with a click. Like a circuit breaker. Like a thing designed to protect the house from burning down. I told her the payment would be handled. I told her to send my father to the hospital to pick up my car keys and house keys, because someone would need to deal with the towed car and feed my dog, and I made it sound logistical, a chore, a favor. And she sighed like I was asking the world of her, and she said she'd send him over after he finished his coffee. After his coffee. My father walked into my hospital room at 11:40 a.m., almost exactly 11 hours after the EMT had first called. He did not bring flowers. He did not look at the cast on my arm or the bruising that had spread across the left side of my face overnight into a color I didn't have a name for. He walked in already talking, already mid-complaint, about the parking at the hospital and the cost of the garage, and he stopped about 4 feet inside the door. He stopped because of who was sitting in the chair next to my bed. Reese had landed at 10:50. I'd finally reached him at 6 that morning, when the conference's first session let out and his phone came back to life and lit up with the 11 calls and the text I'd sent at the worst hour of my life. He had not finished his coffee. He had walked out of a keynote, left his luggage with a colleague, and bought the first flight home with the kind of efficiency that makes me believe in marriage. By the time my father strolled in, my husband had been sitting beside me for almost an hour, holding my good hand, having already had a very quiet, very productive conversation with me about the state of my family and the state of my finances. And next to Reese, in the other chair, sat a woman in a charcoal suit with a leather folder on her lap. Her name was Margot, and she was the attorney who handled my business contracts. I'd called her at 9:40, 25 minutes after my mother hung up on me for the second time, and asked her if she could come down and bring some paperwork. She'd cleared her morning. My father looked at Reese. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at the folder, and the color drained out of his face in a way that, I will be honest, gave me a feeling I am not entirely proud of and would not trade for anything. "What is this?" he said. "What's going on here? Why is there a lawyer?" I let the silence sit for a second. I'd waited 11 hours. He could wait a few more seconds. "Sit down, Dad," I said. "We need to talk about the mortgage." He didn't sit down. People like my father don't sit down when they sense they're losing altitude. They get loud, because loud has always worked. He started in on me, how dare I, after everything they'd done, embarrassed the family by bringing lawyers into a private matter. Did I think I was better than them now? Was that what this was? The money had gone to my head. He got louder and louder, and a nurse stuck her head in to make sure everything was okay, and Reese stood up to his full height and said, very calmly, that everything was fine. My father was just leaving in a minute. And here's the part I'd been waiting my whole life to find out. My husband was not mute. I'd read all those stories where the spouse just stands there like a houseplant while the family runs roughshod, and I'd worried in the cold hours of that night that Reese would freeze, would smooth it over, would tell me to keep the peace. He did not. He looked at my father and he said, "You read her text at 8:47 last night. We have the screenshot. You went to dinner. You're not going to raise your voice in this room. You're going to listen, and then you're going to leave." My father is not a man who has ever been spoken to that way, and the shock of it actually shut him up for a moment, which gave Margot the opening to do the thing I'd asked her to come do. She opened the folder. She slid a single sheet across the rolling tray table, past the half-eaten Jell-O, and she explained it in the plain, unhurried voice of someone who bills by the hour and is in no rush. The monthly transfers to my parents' mortgage account would stop, effective immediately. The next payment, the one my mother had called about, would not be made by me. Going forward, the mortgage was their responsibility, as it had legally always been, since the house was in their name and I was simply, voluntarily, a person who'd been paying it. There was no contract obligating me. That had been the whole arrangement, my generosity, freely given and therefore freely revoked. "You can't just stop," my father said. "We have a budget. We've planned around that money. You can't just pull the rug out. You read the text," I said. "And you went to dinner." I kept saying it. It became a kind of refrain, the only sentence I had, the entire case for the prosecution in 8 words. He'd talk, and I'd let him talk, and then I'd say it again. "You read the text, and you went to dinner. There's no argument against it. There's no spin. It is a fact with the moral weight of a tombstone." He left. Eventually he left, after threats and then bargaining and then a sort of stunned, deflating disbelief. And the last thing he said in the doorway was that my mother was going to hear about this, like that was supposed to frighten me, like I was 9 and being sent to wait for the real authority to come deal with me. I told him she already had. I told him I'd called her at 9:42, right after Margot, and that the conversation had been short. It had been short because my mother had hung up on me. A third time. She'd hung up on me when I said the word lawyer, because in her mind a lawyer was a kind of betrayal, so total it didn't even merit a response, and that, more than anything else, that whole horrible day told me everything about where I'd ranked. She would talk to me when I was an ATM. She would not talk to me when I had boundaries. I went home 2 days later. Reese drove me slow over every bump because my ribs screamed, and our dog lost his entire mind with joy in the driveway, and I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in the hospital. The kind of crying that's mostly relief. For the first time in 6 years, there was no transfer scheduled for the first of the month. The hole in my chest where $2,400 used to disappear was just closed, healed over. And I kept waiting to feel guilty, and the guilt never came, and that absence was its own quiet revelation. The fallout came the way these things do, in waves, through other people. An aunt called to say I was tearing the family apart. A cousin texted a paragraph about how blood is thicker than water that I didn't bother reading past the first line. My mother sent, 2 weeks later, a long email that I almost deleted unread and then made myself read, the way you press on a bruise. It was a masterpiece, that email. Pages of it. Not one sentence asking how my arm was healing. Not one. It was a ledger, an itemized list of everything they'd ever done for me. Going back to childhood, the cost of my braces, the cost of my first car, as if a parent feeding and clothing their child were a loan that came due the moment the child got injured and stopped paying. The braces, I did the math, came to about $1,100 in the early 2000s. I had given them more than 200 times that, but the braces were in the ledger and the 200,000 was not, because the 200,000 had become, in their telling, simply what I owed for the privilege of being allowed in the family. I didn't reply to the email. There was no reply. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moment you finally stop. There's no satisfying final speech, no scene where they understand and apologize and you all weep and embrace. They don't understand. They are constitutionally incapable of understanding, because understanding would require them to see me as a person who was wronged, and they have no slot for that. The same way they had no slot for that, the strong one is on a backboard. The reply I wanted didn't exist, because the person who could give it didn't exist. What I got instead was better and stranger and quieter than revenge. Penny called me about a month after the accident, not to apologize. Penny doesn't apologize, Penny escalates, but to inform me that because I'd stopped helping, our parents were considering selling the house I'd kept over their heads for 6 years, and that this was, somehow, my fault, and what was I going to do about it? And I sat with the phone against my ear, in my own kitchen, healing, with my husband making dinner 4 feet away and humming something off key. And I felt the old machinery in my chest reach for the familiar gear, the one labeled Fix It, and I felt it find nothing there. The gear was gone. I'd taken it out myself. That sounds really hard for them, I said. I hope they figure it out. Penny didn't know what to do with that. She'd never heard it before. There was a long silence, and then she said, with the bewilderment of someone watching a vending machine refuse a perfectly good dollar, "But you always help." "I know," I said. "I used to. I want to tell you that I sat there afterward feeling triumphant, fist in the air, music swelling. I didn't. What I felt was tired and clean, like the day after a fever breaks. I'd spent 6 years believing that if I just gave enough, did enough, was enough, my family would eventually turn around and see me. The accident didn't teach me they wouldn't. Some part of me had always known they wouldn't. What the accident taught me was that I'd been the only one keeping the whole arrangement alive, that the love I'd been buying on installment had never been for sale, and that the most powerful thing I could do, the only revenge that actually changes anything, was to simply stop paying for something that was never going to be delivered. They sold the house that spring. I heard about it from the aunt, who called to deliver the news as a kind of indictment, expecting me to crumble. I didn't crumble. I asked her how the closing went, like a polite acquaintance, and she got flustered and got off the phone. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom rental across town. Penny, last I heard, moved in with them, the three of them in their little apartment, and from what I can tell from the parts of the internet I haven't blocked, they've decided I'm the villain of a story they tell at family functions. I'm no longer invited to. I'm the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her parents in their old age. I've made my peace with being the villain in a story told by people who watched me bleed and chose the wine. Reese and I bought a little cabin 2 hours north last year, on a lake, with the money I used to send away every month. It took 11 payments worth to cover the down payment. I noticed that, the symmetry of it, 11, the same as the hours. We go up most weekends. The dog loves the water. And sometimes on Sunday mornings with coffee on the dock, I think about my mother's voice through that EMT's phone. Is she dying? No. Then it can wait. And I realize she was right about one thing. It could wait. I just didn't know. That night, that what was waiting was me finally choosing myself. For 6 years, I believed that if I just gave enough, my family would finally turn around and see me. I wired the mortgage on the first of every month. I covered Penny's emergencies. I told myself that love was something you earned through usefulness, and so I made myself useful over and over until I became furniture in my own family. The accident didn't break that belief. The accident just turned the lights on so I could finally see what I'd been standing in. Here's the thing nobody told me about cause and effect. My parents didn't suddenly become cruel the night I crashed. They'd always been like that. I had simply been paying to keep the cruelty quiet. Every transfer I sent bought me one more month of being tolerated, and I mistook tolerance for love because I'd never let myself test the difference. The moment I stopped paying, the truth surfaced instantly. Because the truth had been there the whole time, just submerged under $2,400 a month. You can't buy your way into someone's heart. You can only rent a spot, and the rent never ends. What saved me wasn't anger, though I had plenty of that. What saved me was finally being honest about what I was actually seeing instead of what I wished I were seeing. When my mother said that doesn't explain the mortgage, I could have explained it away one more time, the way I always had. Looking clearly at a hard truth and refusing to flinch from it is its own kind of clarity, and it took me 31 years to find mine. I think a lot of us confuse loyalty with refusing to see. Real wisdom is the courage to look, but seeing isn't enough on its own. I had to do something, and doing something cost me. It cost me a family I'd spent my whole life trying to please. The morning I called Margot from that hospital bed, my hands were shaking, and not from the painkillers. Drawing a boundary when everyone you love will call you the villain. For it takes a steadiness that nobody hands you. You build it the hard way, by surviving the guilt that doesn't actually mean you did anything wrong. The guilt came. I waited for it. And when it never turned into proof of my wrongdoing, I understood it had just been a habit, like flinching at a hand that used to hit you. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself, the one who always pays, always fixes, always shows up for people who'd let you bleed in a parking lot, I want you to hear the one thing I learned. You are not selfish for stopping. Choosing yourself is not abandonment. The strongest, kindest thing I ever did was to let people face the consequences they'd built for themselves and to walk away clean. They sold the house. They tell a story where I'm the monster. And I sit on a dock by a lake every Sunday, healed, and I am at peace with being the villain in a story told by people who watched me hurt and chose the wine.